Right. Second time's the charm, right?
Hey, isn't it?
Yeah.
Dropping out. It's usually me in the UK that has problems.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So let's get the show on the road.
Okay, are you good? You doing all right anyway?
Yeah,
You
doing
good?
pretty good.
Yeah, nice to see
You
you.
see too.
Good. Okay. So you're back for round two of the US have nuked Japan. Well, I hope you've learned a few things since we last spoke, Chandler. Um, I've been things actually surprising. Stand by what I say, and doubly some research, and there's actually quite a lot of opposition from the US generals. But I think I'd like to start my debate off by saying I don't believe, and I'm not alone in believing, that it wasn't actually that ended the war. Was actually the invasion of Manchuria by Russia, which put the final seal on Japan's resistance to surrender. Let me just give you a little quote here. It's from Eisenhower, actually. Okay, so this is of Dwight Eisenhower's memoirs. In July 1945, Secretary of War Stimson, visiting my headquarters in Germany, informed me that our government would drop an atomic bomb on Japan. I voiced to him my grave misgivings, first on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was necessary, and secondly, because I thought that our country should avoid shocking world opinion by the use of a weapon whose employment was, I thought, no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives. It was my belief that Japan was, at that very moment, seeking some way of surrender with a minimum loss of face. He repeated something along similar lines in a Newsweek interview, just one line. He said, the Japanese were ready to surrender and it wasn't necessary to hit them with that awful thing.
Okay. Yeah. No
So,
mic passing here, so I guess so I'll start with this. Yeah.
no, just dive in.
Yeah, so first I'll kind of
Sorry.
talk about I won't rehash a bunch of the points we did in the last one for the sake of making it a little different, but I think there is some area that has to overlap naturally.
Okay.
And so the last one, I think we can both agree that the ultimate goal of this is to save as many lives as possible. Life is obviously inherently valuable, and whether it's Japanese life or American life, that should be our goal into going to this. And that's my first contention, is that dropping the bombs did save more lives than they took. There's around roughly 220,000 people killed by both droppings of the atomic bombs. And if the U.S. did not drop the atomic bombs, let's say we didn't even get involved with Japan, the next thing that would have happened for sure would have been conquest of Japan. The Soviets already had 600,000 Japanese soldiers and citizens that they had captured and were now put into war camps. And as you stated, we're pressing the advantage onto the island of Japan. And certainly that would have been the next step. And then my second contention will be that Soviets probably would have been much worse to be conquered by the Soviets than they were directly after we rebuilt their government, things of that nature. The Soviets not only were very brash and brutal to their own people, but were even less kind to that of foreigners. And if they, just like they were with the 600,000 POWs, they would have been in labor camps with harsh conditions, and probably would have died off fairly certainly. And then the last main contention I have is the precedent set. I discussed this a bit in our first debate. So dropping the nuclear bombs does set a precedent for the world, as in how terrible these things are. We weren't even completely sure what it was going to do. And using them in this fairly minimal example of just these two cities does show people what they're capable of and deters the use of them in the future. Absolutely. And so to address some of your points, you said dropping the bomb did not put the final seal, I believe is the word you used, on Japan. To that, I would answer, yeah, it was not the last act to occur, but I think we can both agree it had a significant impact on probably the Japanese leadership because that made them understood there was no chance they'd ever win the war. None whatsoever, because we just vastly outweighed them when it came to destructive capability. And the second one in that quote, you said the dropping the bombs was not mandatory, was not necessary because they were likely ready to surrender anyway. And to that, I'd say there's minimal evidence. If you look at something like Iwo Jima, where they did not surrender, if you look at Japanese culture at that time where surrender wasn't really an option, it was better to die honorably. I think all those point to there was going to be more resistance to surrendering. Yeah, go ahead.
Chandler, I mean, I'm just only for the sake of having a debate, because the points you're making, there's so that it's going to be difficult for me to sort of come back and counter all those points, and I think you're sort of losing me. You may lose the audience as well. So just slow down for a sec. Okay, I mean, first of all, I've just written a few notes here. I take on board your point about testing, showing the world what an atomic bomb can do. I mean, while that may be a cold, calculated, clinical move, for want of a better word, it's still evil. And I'm sorry, but you're right in that the Japanese didn't want to surrender to the Soviets, but according to the top generals, the Japanese were actually ready to surrender before it invaded Manchuria. Okay, so I think that negates that point. What Japan would not accept additional surrender, because the Japanese people would never have accepted the what do you call it? Well, the loss of their wanted to keep their what do you call it? Imperial system, or their the monarchy, etc. And in actual fact, the final surrender was not unconditional. It was actually a conditional surrender, in that the emperor stayed in place. So I'll go back. I'll pass back to you now, because those are just some points. You may have to sort of just you've said. So
yeah, for sure. Okay. So my other points were about like the net benefit to saving lives, how significantly more lives would have been lost for, say, a land invasion, either on the Soviet side or on the American side, compared to just dropping the nuclear bombs. And then the third one was the precedent set by dropping the nuclear bombs, and how it deters the use of them in the future, because the world understood what they were capable of.
Well, yeah, I mean, but really, I mean, I think the point you just made about it saved lives because it negated the need for a land invasion. But my previous point, I think, negated what you've just said, because as the generals have pointed out, Japan was ready to surrender, 1, maybe 2 months before she dropped. So it doesn't make a point, saying that they had to do a land invasion anyway. So I can't see how you can say that would have that the dropping the bomb saved lives.
Do you think the Soviet Union? Sorry, hold on, your mic cut out. Are you good? All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Carry on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're back.
I can hear you.
But yeah. So, do you think the Soviet Union would have accepted anything less than unconditional surrender?
Would have accepted anything less? You mean if? Well, hang on. I'm just trying to think how to frame that, because do you mean if the Soviet Union had have completely overrun Japanese forces, would they have accepted anything less than unconditional surrender? I don't know, but that's not the point. The point is that Japan, Eisenhower has said, and as MacArthur has said, Japan was ready to surrender before the USSR invaded. So it it's just doesn't come into it. Let me. I've written these quotes down and I read them. This is where are we? Admiral William Leahy, Chief of Staff to Presidents Roosevelt and Truman. It is my opinion that the use of this barbarous weapon at Hiroshima and Nagasaki was of no material assistance in our war against Japan, already defeated and ready to surrender because of the effective sea blockade and the successful bombing with conventional weapons. The lethal possibilities of atomic warfare in the future are frightening. My own feeling was that in being the first to use it, we had a ethical standard common to the barbarians of the Dark Ages. I was not taught to make war in that fashion, and wars cannot be won by destroying women and children. So.
Yeah, I mean, come on. I think this is the crux of the entire debate here, is whether or not, at least on the points that we laid out, whether or not Japan was going to surrender with or without the bombs. Because obviously we can agree, hypothetically speaking, if we had to choose between a land invasion and dropping the nuclear bombs are probably a better idea, right? Can we agree on that premise first?
But there was no necessity for a land invasion.
Hypothetically.
But it's not But it's not hypothetically. It is a matter of fact, as stated by at least two high-ranking. One's an admiral, one's a general. I can quote you more as well. That it wasn't needed anyway. So you took hypothetically. I mean, that's really just down to a war game. If you said, well, let's imagine a scenario like this. We're not imagining a scenario. We're dealing with what actually happened.
Yes, my point is, if we can agree that nuclear bombs are better than a land invasion, then we just have to deter whether or not a land invasion was possible or if it was the capability of surrendering.
But I don't agree that. Oh, I don't agree that nuclear bombs are better than a land invasion. No.
Okay. Well, under the sheer fact of saving lives, bombs are significantly better, both on the American and the Japanese side. But getting back to the main premise, which is the idea of surrender, I think the idea of Japan was just ready and willing to surrender because they already knew they're defeated is drastically overestimated. So to start, that was never represented in any of the battles they fought throughout the war, of Japan just willing to give up. No, most of the time, Japanese soldiers fought through the death. Like I said, in Iwo Jima was present in almost every interaction they had with foreign troops. But also, just in Japanese culture at the time, as I've brought up, the honorable death was better than a cowardly surrender at the time. Right? That's even still ingrained in Japanese culture to this extent.
But Chandler, you're missing the point that. The Japanese do what they are. I'm not trying to be condescending to them, but it's this thing about they will do what their emperor tells them. It's not that they would have just carried on fighting forever. If their country, their emperor surrenders, then they lay down their weapons, and that's the whole point. You could say that about any country. Like Britain was sort of. His whole plan to fight on after, if Germany had invaded, which of course would have been unsuccessful. But, you can't say, oh, it's in the mindset of Japanese to fight fanatically to the death. And, that's because they were still at war. When the emperor says we're surrendering, the Japanese would do as they're told. So I'm afraid that argument, it doesn't seem to bear any fruit.
Yeah, I understand that if a leader opts to surrender, generally speaking, there's not a whole lot the population can do about that. I'm well aware of this, but at the time, there was really minimal evidence to support that they were overly willing to surrender. So first of all, I have to talk about the justice and the reason that we pushed for unconditional surrender rather than accepting as it was. And it was mainly for the atrocities that happened with Japan, as we discussed in the last debate, things like China.
But you didn't. But surrender was never achieved anyway. It was a conditional surrender.
I understand. Starting, we probably got a lot more conditions met on our end since we dropped the atomic bombs than the latter, right? So I would assume there's going to be a net advantage as far as surrender on the American side from dropping the bombs. But two, it's because the reason we pressed for it so hard, and the reason that that was our goal, is because of what Japan did during the war and prior to the war, like the 500,000 people that were killed in the Asian Holocaust in China. There were huge atrocities that occurred during this period of time. And so America, I don't think, was in the business of trying to cut deals. They were in a business of ending the war, and they did that with the most swift action they believed they could.
So is it a matter then of simply punishing civilians for the actions of the emperor's army?
Well, for one, we have to determine whether or not that's a better outcome. So, like I said, if we're talking about now we have to end the war and we're not looking towards surrender, then it comes back to the land invasion versus the dropping of the atomic bombs, which, once again, dropping of the atomic bomb saves significantly more lives comparatively.
But you're making a hollow argument with respect. You know, you keep coming back to the, it was better than invasion. As I've demonstrated, there was no need for either. To quote, where are we? Okay. May 28, 1945, Hoover visited President Truman and suggested a way to end the Pacific War. I am convinced that if you as president will make a short way to the people of Japan, tell them that they can have their emperor if they surrender, that it will not mean unconditional surrender. You'll get a peace in Japan. You'll have both wars. And it says here a bit further down where we are, the Japanese were prepared to negotiate all the way from February 1945 up to and before the time the atomic bombs were dropped. If such leads had been followed up, there would have been no occasion to drop the bombs. So, Hoover's biographer Richard Norton Smith has written, use of the bomb had besmirched America's reputation. He, Hoover, told friends, it ought to have been described in graphic terms before being flung out into the sky over Japan. I don't know if you got that, but did I cut out then for a minute? I was just reading.
Yeah, I was able to get most of it. But yeah, no, I mean, okay. Obviously, it's a double-edged sword. Japan was practically defeated by that point. I won't disagree with that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But the main thing about this that I think we're overestimating is obviously the net gain is to save as many lives as possible, right? So even in unconditional, even if they accepted unconditional surrender, or you said keep their emperor and things of that nature. Well, to start, keeping your emperor, I think, is a terrible idea, considering the emperor and the leaders of Japan were the ones responsible for all the atrocities that happened in Asia. And so those people need some sort of justice, right? We would have never let Adolf Hitler remain in power, even during a surrender after what he did during World War II, in the Holocaust. Comparatively. And then again, I don't think the USSR would have probably agreed to the conditions of keeping the emperor at the time. And the USSR was probably a bigger player in this prior to the dropping the atomic bombs in America, considering they had over 500,000 Japanese troops in POW, and they were planning an invasion of the island, which even if we didn't invade the island, the USSR certainly was planning for it and would have caused much more lives lost.
Okay. Well, you keep on going on about saving more lives. Well, surely the best saving lives is to actually end the war as soon as possible. You're saying about, that the emperor should have been punished for atrocities. Okay. Well, what about President Truman then? Shouldn't he have been prosecuted? Shouldn't he have been hanged for, wasn't that an atrocity? Or was that okay? Is it nice to be
the difference
bombed by a nuclear bomb?
The dropping the atomic bombs can be justified under a legitimate military target to win the war and to bring the war to a swift end compared
on civilians.
Yeah, well, yes. Civilians are killed all the time
really?
in wars, absolutely. But the difference is,
but if it's deliberate though, Chandler, then that's a war crime.
Not if it. Well, first of all,
if you drop bombs on civilians deliberately, then that's a war crime.
First
So are you advocating times?
First of all, I believe it was Hiroshima actually did have a large number of military inhabitants. It was one of the two locations. Actually had a fairly significant number of military inhabitants. At the cost of
That
civilian
doesn't
lives,
wash, I'm afraid.
obviously.
No, come on, you can't. That's a ridiculous argument. You can't say that they didn't think they'd kill many civilians by dropping an atomic bomb,
I never.
which exploded above the city. Surash, I mean, I'm not laughing because of what happened. Obviously, it's true. I'm laughing at your, uh, you know, there's the military targets there. I come on. I mean, and it killed a lot more people than quoted, far more people than that. No, I'm sorry, but I think a lot of people regard the actions of the USA as an atrocity. It's not like, oh well, because it was flown up by a nice man in a USAF uniform who had a nice wife and family back home, that makes it okay. It doesn't. It's a barbaric act.
Yeah, I'm clearly not advocating for us to just it's this overly positive thing. What I'm saying is it was definitely a lesser of two evils, and as far as ending the war, it was certainly effective at that, especially compared to the latter, right, that we've talked about with the USSR. And so even though civilians died, and always that's a tragedy, it's still net positive as far as lives remaining on this earth. And also, let's not pretend that
But
the Japanese people were in opposition to like the Japanese authority, right? It's not like they were the innocent Germans, under the regime of Adolf Hitler, what's his name, Alfred Schindler, I believe. But no, it's these people were in clear support of the government. A lot of them were there was a lot of harboring and praise and like idolization of Japanese troops and what Japan was doing to the world, even compared to places like China where the Asian Holocaust was happening. And so, no, I don't think it's comparative at all to compare the dropping of the bombs of in Hiroshima and Nagasaki with like 200,000 lives, which is a big number, but not even all those are civilians. Compared to like the 500,000 women that were raped and they're sticking bayonets up their vaginas in places like China by the Japanese troops while they're conquering the area and slaughtering innocent people.
well, again, you're just advocating punishing civilians for something that military troops did. I mean, that's ridiculous. And again, you keep on talking about this, the lesser of two evils. Like it was, we had to do this, or else we would have had to do land invasion. That's nonsense. As has been proved by many high-ranking generals and admirals. General Douglas MacArthur, MacArthur biographer William Manchester has described MacArthur's reaction to the issuance by the Allies of the Potsdam Proclamation to Japan. The declaration in July demanded that Japan unconditionally or face prompt and utter destruction. MacArthur was appalled. He knew that the Japanese would never renounce their emperor and that without him, an orderly transition to peace would be impossible anyhow, because his people would never submit to Allied occupation unless he, that is to say, the emperor, ordered it. Ironically, when the surrender did come, it was conditional, and the condition was a continuation of the imperial reign. Had the general's advice been followed, the resort to atomic weapons at Hiroshima and Nagasaki might have been unnecessary. So, this is it. I mean, it's, we can see from this that it's been brought about. I mean, for you to say that, oh no, well, it seems to me like what you're saying is, no, we had to prolong the war because we had to get back, we had to punish the Japanese for the appalling actions of the Japanese army. I mean, and that's not even to say that, it's the whole of the Japanese army. You can't say, the whole of the Japanese army did all these appalling things any more than you can say that the whole of, the American army or the Marines did appalling things, because some of them did. I think we've demonstrated here that your president certainly did appalling things, and that, people idolize him, don't they? Is it really so different?
Let me ask you a question. So, if you're saying just peace under basically any terms is the perfect outcome, should the entire
I didn't say any terms.
so what would have been your ideal terms? Just they got to keep their emperor and things of that nature? Like, where do we draw the line?
Sorry, what would be my ideal?
Yeah, where do we draw the line? So
where do we draw the line? Okay. Well, I mean, it's daft to ask me exactly all the sort of the details and that, but I would say it's quite reasonable for people to keep to agree to decommission their battleships, etc., their cruisers, all that sort of thing, aircraft carriers, like Germany did. Why not? I mean, for goodness sake, you've got to rebuild the country. What is the point in destroying an entire that for what purpose? You just you laid a very evil precedent. You made a very evil precedent for the world by doing that. When I say you, obviously.
Yep.
I know, you.
No, but it's but no, I mean, the point is here, like, after the German, the Third Reich and Adolf Hitler, we would have never left Adolf Hitler in power, right? And the reason is, like, one, like I talked about as one of my things, a precedent, right? We will never, as a world, say that a leader of a country can use the people of that country to commit mass atrocities, and then for the sake of wanting to maintain peace, allow them to continue on, right? When something of that caliber. And this ties into that other point where you said it wasn't the entire Japanese army and some Marines did bad things, which is fair. American troops and troops of all country have done bad things. But it's when you get to numbers of this high magnitude, there clearly has to be an ongoing trend, right? So when it's 500,000 women raped, and they're carrying along as they march down the road and just repeatedly raping them, while they're touring throughout China, slaughtering people, that's clearly an ongoing trend, and it's given by orders that it's allowed. It's not like it's just a random, defectiveness.
But Sir Chandler, so why was the emperor allowed to remain in? If you say that you can't let him remain in power, he will remain in power. There must have been a reason.
Yes, because they gave us practically all the other terms, including we got to halt. We basically regulated their military significantly, and we also drafted them a constitution.
Exactly.
So we basically got all the other terms.
Exactly.
Sorry.
That's my point. That exactly demonstrates my point. Those terms would have been agreed. Would have been May, June, or July of 1945. So why do all?
You think that the Japanese people and the Japanese leadership would have stood while a foreign power that they were at war with came in, regulated their arms and their military, and drafted them a new governing document to live by?
But that's what they did. So
they did afterwards.
It's just that they would have done it earlier.
No. See, because this is also the moral effect.
Look, I'm sorry. No. As I have demonstrated by the quotes from the people that I've just mentioned, that Japan was ready to do that 2 or 3 months before dropping.
I have read no such evidence that suggests that they would have agreed to a constitution and to have their forces significantly limited. So if you have that quote, I would be rather interested.
Well,
but saying they would surrender is a pretty broad term. That can mean a wide variety of things on the conditions that they surrender under.
Well, I mean, I can read you another quote, but how many? I've actually got lots and lots of quotes that if you can look them on the internet, it's there. There's another one here. When I asked General MacArthur about the decision to drop the bomb, to learn he had not even been consulted. What I asked would his advice have been, he replied that he saw no military justification for the dropping of the bomb. The war might have ended weeks earlier, he said, if the United States had agreed, as it later did anyway, to the retention of the institution of the emperor. So it seems to me that, maybe the war was prolonged to simply demonstrate, the new power in the world, which was the the USA's power, which became, everyone sort of says, oh, we had to stop Adolf Hitler because he wanted world domination. But why is it okay then for America to have world domination?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that last sentence?
Well, I mean, just as a little offshoot, like, why does everybody say, that we had to stop Adolf Hitler because he wanted world domination? But why is it okay for America to have world domination?
Okay, so on that, I would say America does not want world domination, and my evidence for that would be if we did, we would have had it, we would have done it already. Absolutely.
Are you
Well,
kidding me? But you have
no,
already done it.
you're trying to say
Kidding me?
world
Are you telling me that America doesn't have an empire?
I didn't say they don't have an empire.
On.
I said we don't have world domination.
They do have world domination. Well, okay, it's not the whole of the world. Everyone's achieved that, and there's no way that Adolf Hitler would achieve that either. Not even Britain. Well, sometimes it's my country. When I'm embarrassed about it, it's not, and then I say I'm Irish, which I am. So I'm half English and half. I can cop out, you see. It's quite handy sometimes. What was I saying? But yes, no, I mean, come on. America does dominate the world. There's anyway, it does.
Yeah. But even aside from that, we got another. Yeah, we got plenty of time. But even aside from that,
13 minutes. Yeah. Okay.
Back to the main point. So you're saying it's simply to demonstrate. Naturally, I don't have the exact documents in front of me. Naturally, imagine that after demonstrating the power of the nuclear bombs, Japan would be pressured into adhering to much more conditions on surrender than before, right? Like the bombs were used, and this kind of ties into what I was talking about as far as the effect on the Japanese people. As barbaric as it sounds, they were extremely effective at pointing out that Japan had no chance to ever win the war, right? Like zero chance, and it made it wide known.
But it has also been demonstrated that it was not the bombs that made Japan surrender. It was invasion by Russia of Manchuria.
I agree, and that's the straw that broke the camel's back.
So again, it just
it's just because that was the
not the
just because it was the final thing doesn't necessarily mean it's the most significant or contributing factor. Correct?
I disagree. No, I disagree entirely. I think it's fair to argue that it was a number of factors obviously contributed towards it, but the fact remains that Japan was a defeated nation, and the war could have been ended many weeks with a great saving of life on both sides.
Okay, so I will now go into another case here. So even assuming everything you said is right, the war was going to be ended on basically the same terms, regardless of if we drop the bombs or not. I would still support the dropping of the bombs, even if we assume that all you say is true and all your points are correct. And this is why. Because the precedent set by dropping the atomic bombs saved probably exponentially more lives. So, for example, during the Cold War, one of the key reasons that the U.S. and the Soviets did not nuke each other, one was mutually assured destruction, of course, but two, because they knew what they could do, and they knew what they could do used on each other, right? Even before, if you look at somebody like Robert Oppenheimer, he was the prime mind behind the nuclear bomb and the Manhattan Project, and he had no clue what it was going to do. Even other scientists, some said it would catch fire to the Earth's atmosphere and destroy the Earth. Like, they had no clue what was going to happen. And after they did know what's going to happen, that is a deter effect for everybody else that becomes nuclear capable, because they see how atrocious it can be, and especially if it's used against them, as in the case of the Cold War. So it's still a net benefit of lives comparatively to the future of how atomic bombs would have been used if there wasn't that precedent set.
I think that's a twisted, justification, to say, look what we can do. Look at the power we have. Let's demonstrate it. Look, we've killed, several 100,000 people. Doing it for good. The strange thing about so-called evil people is that I don't believe there is such a thing as an evil person, because people do evil. They don't realize they're doing evil. They think they're doing, you know, Adolf Hitler thought he was doing good for his own people or for his race or whatever. Your President Truman thought he was doing good. But I'm sorry, but it's doing. If you're talking about the some of the scientists connected with the bomb, Albert Einstein said, right, okay, this article appeared, which he sent to the New York Times about a year afterwards. Professor Albert Einstein said that he was sure that President Roosevelt would have forbidden the atomic bombing of Hiroshima had he been alive, and that it was probably carried out to end the Pacific War before Russia could participate. So let's see what else he says. As far as his own life was concerned, one thing seemed quite clear. I made one great mistake in my life, he said, just paraphrasing slightly. When I signed the letter to President Roosevelt recommending that atomic bombs be made, but there was some justification, the danger that the Germans would make them. Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me like it's the start of the Cold War. Really, make it any less justified to me. You know, I'm sorry, but you know, I don't think your arguments may make sense to you, but I find them a little bit twisted and perhaps even a bit.
They're definitely cynical at best, but no, I mean it's a very dark topic. And clearly I won't justify the dropping of the bombs by saying they're good, but I will restate that I do think it was a lesser of two evils. So to start, let's talk about like the Potsdam Declaration, right? That's what you talked about. We wanted very harsh terms, things like unconditional surrender. The Japanese actually, obviously, like we stated, they did not accept the terms. And as I'm reading here, it was actually fairly clear, apparently, to the generals at the time, that the Soviets had plans, if the Potsdam Declaration was not accepted, to enter the war in Pacific and to start preparations to invade the island of Japan. So, what would you suggest in that scenario, where the Japanese do not accept the declaration set forth, and the Soviets say that we're going to invade this island?
I would say that the terms are too harsh. You know, this is what negotiations are all about. I mean, I suspect actually that some of those terms may have involved concessions, which would have allowed, perhaps exploitation of mineral rights, etc. You know, there's always the money people behind it, isn't there? You know, let's cash in on all this from our foe. I just don't accept that. I don't accept that nations who want to save lives and stop cannot come to an agreement, which they eventually did.
Okay, so let's see here. One moment. All right, so let's see here. The main differences between the Potsdam Declaration and the surrender of Japan. Let's see. The main one, just looking at the two documents here, thankfully converted into PDF. The main one is it allowed us to actually regulate the army of Japan that committed the heinous acts, like we said before. That was not something that was in the Potsdam Declaration, but it is something that they agreed to after the dropping of the bombs. Do you think that having the army of Japan regulated and limited is a good thing, especially after the acts they committed in China?
Yeah, of course. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So the question is, having their army limited, and stopping further aggression, is that worth it? Just one of the metrics, along with all the other things I brought up, like the precedent and the fear of the Soviets.
Well, you're saying is bomb to have that control over the army? Is that what you're saying? I believe that's what you're saying. I believe what you're saying, Chandler, is do I believe dropping the bomb in order to get my way over the.
Yes, to be able to regulate the military.
In theory, I mean, no, well, I'm not going to. I can't say yes or no to that because, like my main point is, I do not believe that it was necessary. Just because Japan said no to that particular, what's it called, the document, the Potsdam thing.
Yep.
I don't believe. I do not believe that Japan would have said, we will surrender, but we want to keep our emperor and we want to keep X, Y, Z. I just don't think that's the case. I think with a bit more jaw, we would have got there. Of course, at the end of the day, none of us can, we can say what if. Nobody knows.
Okay, so
but we're having a discussion upon sort of moral lines, really, and I believe. I mean, call me naive if you wish, but what I've read about what the generals said, the generals are saying that Japan was a defeated nation many, many weeks before August. And I think that they could have been brought to the negotiating table with a surrender which suited both parties.
Okay. So let's examine what happened here historically in our last few minutes. Just I'll sum up my argument, and then you can go. So with the Potsdam Agreement, with the things that were put in place, like the emperor and the army being regulated, the military, those were agreements not made under that status quo. The dropping of the bombs did actually pressure Japan into agreeing to some more contentions. That's a net positive. Russia was going to invade, and they already had 600,000 Japanese citizens there working to death, and probably would have captured more, and everybody in Japan would be speaking Russian about now. That's also a net positive gain of life. Truman, a quote saying that he wants to end the bloodshed of Americans in the Pacific. Dropping the atomic bomb certainly achieved that. That is a positive. And let's even compare this to other things that have happened throughout history, right? We don't feel that the marching of tanks through German towns was of the same level of, nuking the bombs, right? Because it's all this taboo of the word nuclear bomb, right? Which of course is heinous, but it's not significantly more heinous comparatively. If you look at what happened with the atrocities sent out by the German emperor and by the German armies, I believe it's absolutely justified. You're trying to bring the war to a swift end for not only all the lives on all sides of the war, but also for the justice to those people. I'll give you the last 2 minutes to sum up.
Well, as history has demonstrated, the bombs was not the final blow that ended the war. It was the invasion of Manchuria by the Soviet forces. But I laughed a little bit when they would all have been speaking Russian. I just pet hates this emotive thing, like, oh, we'd all be speaking German. We'd all be speaking like, it just really gets me, I mean, if it wasn't for Germany, all of Europe would be speaking Russian. Do you want to do that as a debate sometime?
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, we could do that, but I mean, what's so bad about speaking German? Your country very nearly spoke German, because when it was constituted in 1776, German was very nearly chosen as native language. Did you know that?
I'm well aware, but clearly we don't mean speaking German or speaking Russian as like negative things as far as speaking the language. We mean that as being dictated by a foreign power.
I know. I just find it. I just find it such a pathetic argument. That's all. I really do. So just don't ever do it again. Anyway. Not many seconds left. So anyway, it's been a pleasure to catch up with you, Chandler, and I'm glad to see you. I've been away for quite a while actually because I went on holiday to Thailand. You can tell how tanned I am.
Yeah.
Okay. It was like I got on the plane to come back. I got on the plane like 33 degrees, and got back to one. So it was like and then we had snow and all that sort of thing. So but I notice you haven't got a tan either.
Yeah, no, it's
why would you?
Still in school. Yeah, you need to come visit America sometime and help us make the country great again.
Yeah. All right, I'll be there. Anyway, I think that's about it. I think we're going to time out now. No, I don't, that doesn't work. No. Anyway, to see you. Yeah, you take care.